Tim has some more on that.
I think that's an important point, and that is that teachers are there to help the students. And the more prepared the teacher is in the actual topic that they are going to be covering, the more capable they are, the more time they might have to handle the emotional side of learning or just in dealing with their own job. It's a tough one when you deal with the bureaucracy that has certain goals and objectives, and then the students have theirs, and you're trying to be the liaison between the two and to come up with certain results. I too applaud the efforts of teachers around the world.
Thank you. Our next question is from Argentina. It is from El Grupo Previsional Nación in Buenos Aires, Argentina.
Hello, good morning. We are calling from Buenos Aires, the Grupo Previsional. I have a question for Eric Kaufmann. What is your experience in the self-confidence testing? How do you achieve progress with specific interrelation courses? What is the most efficient road? And I'm asking about your own experience with the self-confidence testing.
The question is about experience, my experience with self-confidence testing. There are various tests, there are various inventories for measuring self-confidence. There are many psychologically based programs that will measure self-confidence. I think that not to sound repetitive, but the question previously about how does a leader remain impartial, I think there's self-confidence is something that we can certainly measure on paper. It measures very effectively, and I've found in my experience, in the reflection of what other people are saying about me and feeding back to me. So once I engage in various activities to increase my self-confidence, whether that means learning more about my job or whatever it is that I do, being better prepared for anything that I get into, which is a great boost to self-confidence, taking lessons or taking courses in being a better presenter or learning more social skills. Those are various different aspects of self-confidence. And then getting feedback from people. I think that often, and in emotional competence, it is about human interaction. So in my experience, before I resort to tests and before I start taking objective written inventories, I am more inclined to have a dialogue, a discussion, get feedback from other people. So confidence has a direct relationship with honesty and with trust and with vulnerability. And so I will engage in whatever I'm doing to increase my confidence, and then I ask for feedback from people around me about how do I seem, what do I need to work on further, what am I doing well.
Our next question is from the Dominican Republic. It is from the Centro de Gestión e Investigación in the city of Santo Domingo in the Dominican Republic.
My question has to do with the sub-skills that emotional competence entails. For example, empathy, communication, leadership. How can we initiate some of those skills within an organization? Because each sub-skill requires specific training. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you. How can you initiate these sub-skills in your organization? Perhaps a place to start would be to choose which one sub-skill you'd like to begin to develop and just make that the goal for a month, for 3 months, for 6 months, or for a year. And if you approach it more one step at a time than trying to figure it all out, it'll just unfold, especially because many of them are interconnected. So you can begin, if you talk about empathy, start doing research on empathy. You can look at on the web. You can ask people around you. You can sit down and think for yourself, what do you think empathy is? You can evaluate what you've heard so far in the program. My recommendation would be begin with one subscale and make that a focus until you feel that you have some level of competence, and then move on from there to the next and then to the next.
Thank you. Our next question is also from the Dominican Republic. It is from the Pontificia Universidad Católica Madre y Maestros in the city of Santiago in the Dominican Republic.
Thank you. Good morning. We are worried, and we share completely the premises of Dr. Eric. But I would like him to mention or to make a suggestion about what to do when in many of our institutions we have so much workload. Since you suggest one task at a time, because many times we're very stressful, we're stressed out, and when we have a clouded mind, then we filter partially some of this information. Therefore, our concern is, what should we do when we have such a multiplicity of tasks? Thank you.
I share in your concern. The anxiety about, or the stress that we feel seems to be universal. There's a great amount of work. There's not enough time to do it in. My suggestion sometimes sounds as though I'm not listening to the question and I'm not understanding the question, but I would suggest the same as I suggested previously, which is we have to slow down. I know this sounds counterintuitive or inappropriate, but the research demonstrates that we can effectively do one thing and do it well. And so even though I understand that there's so many things to do, there is a way to focus and concentrate. I heard once somebody say that even God had to rest after 6 days of production. And so we require to stop, to rest, to rejuvenate, but more importantly, to focus our minds so that we do one thing, we do it well, and we move on. It doesn't mean we have to finish it. I'm not suggesting that every project has to be completed, but we need to focus on one thing and then go to the next. Otherwise, everything becomes even more cloudy, and it becomes even we become less able to retain and to do things well. So do practice, and it's a skill to develop like any skill. Taking the project directly in front, focusing the mind, doing it to a point that you want to stop, and then moving on to the next, and then committing to doing one thing and one thing at a time, and letting distractions go and setting time to come back to it when you choose to come back to it.
Thank you. Our next question is from Mexico. It is from the Instituto Politécnico Nacional de Educación Continua in Mexico City, in Mexico.
What would be the first step in order to recover emotional balance, of course, at work, after a serious human problem, such as a divorce or being fired from work or let go from work?
So some event has happened that has thrown you out of emotional balance, and you want to know what is the first step to regain the balance. I think it's important that there be some acknowledging and discussion of what has happened. So I would say the first step is not to pretend like, oh, this happened, doesn't matter, let me just go on with life. So the first step is to acknowledge what's happened and to understand it, and to be willing to live with what has happened and continue to go. And then I would recommend setting goals so that there's some clarity about what the future brings. Oftentimes when something unsettling has happened, we focus on that, and that pulls us to the past. So understanding that it's happened, accepting that this has happened, and then setting goals for the future. And then I'd say from a very practical perspective, in addition to goals, stop often and take deep breaths. I talk about responding versus reacting. If you find yourself starting to go into a very intensely emotional state and it's not helping you at work, then stop and take a few deep breaths and get back into a more calm state, and then make choices and decisions from there. So accepting what's happened, setting goals, and then learning to stop and breathe would be some great steps for you.
Tim, anything you'd like to add?
I think it's an important point to focus on getting back to work, essentially. We all have different response levels and response rates to, devastating incidences in our lives, and each people progress at those differently. So I think it's a matter of taking it individually. And some people, as Eric points out, it's important to kind of take a deep breath, refocus. Some people want to share more, others don't. It's a matter of ultimately helping, guiding yourself and guiding others to be open to getting back on track and spending the time to maybe share the thoughts with other people, but also to get back on track and get back to work.
Thank you. Our next question is from Mexico City. It is from the Universidad Liceo Cervantino in Irapuato, in the state of Guanajuato, in Mexico.
We're calling from the Universidad Liceo Cervantino, Irapuato, Mexico. How do we achieve that a teamwork reaches appropriate emotional competence within a reasonable period, considering that the old and the new personnel have different experiences, and we have increased communications through internet?
That's an important question, and I think a question that many companies in many countries are asking themselves. One of the first challenges of teamwork is to get everyone to work together. One of the things that a leader of a team might come with is ideas from past business models, and the team leader might want to say, well, here's how we do it. I suggest for the team to begin to bond and to begin to work well as a team as rapidly as possible is to begin the process of teamwork right from the start. And what I mean by that is allow the team to begin to form for itself the rules, the expectations, the goals, rather than it being assigned by one person. Allow the team right away to come together and begin thinking as a team, planning as a team, assigning roles and priorities as a team. And I think if the members begin from the start to interact, then some of the challenges of old and new, of new ideas, of old ideas, will begin to diminish as people recognize one another. As far as the internet goes, it just adds another level of challenge in communication, but it's not, as much as you can do real-time, person-to-person contact, and the internet is good at that, you will diminish the time to build a team. So start with the team, functioning as a team from the first moment, rather than being assigned by some outside agent.
Tim?
Yeah. I have a lot of experience with teamwork over at the University of Phoenix, where many of the courses are group-oriented. And one of the things we find that's very successful, as well as I found out in business, is that almost prior to the team being set up, there's a set of goals, objectives, and resources are identified that will be used to achieve the goals. And teams are brought together that are compatible with those goals. So, for instance, if you're working with a team of people that are in high-pressure jobs, lots of change, you want certain skill sets in those people and capabilities to work in that environment, where in other environments, it's not as rapidly changing, it's not as pressured. Find there are other people that are better there. So we say, try to bring the people together and identify the skills that are needed for all those team members. And so when you lose a team member, you get another one that fits those skills, and it's a pretty seamless transformation and bringing them right into the team, so you don't lose much productivity.
Thank you. Our next question, and I think our last question for this session, will be from Panama. It'll be from the Universidad Tecnológica de Panama in Panama City, Panama.
greeting from the bridge of the world and the heart of the universe. How can we teach businesses the importance of developing human resources when that requires competence and maturity? How can we be effective professionally and at a more personal level too? Thank you.
Eric, the role of maturity. How do you teach it?
How do you teach maturity? How do you convince business that it is a valuable resource in their human resource? A lot of that work is already underway. There's a great amount of research available on the positive impact. Some of it I alluded to in my discussion of the power and the value of human maturity and the human resource in the workplace. Teaching it requires, I think, above all, that the person who's teaching it is mature. A great component of human maturity is the interaction, not just the concepts. We can learn concepts day in and day out, but it's how we behave. And how we behave, we can learn very quickly with role models. So to the question of what's the fastest way to learn the maturity, it's to have role models who can demonstrate what it's like to behave that way. To the question of how valuable is it, there's lots of research available that we can follow up on, and I can direct you to seeing the actual numbers of the value of maturity.
Thank you for your questions. Let's now move to the second module of our program, in which Tim will discuss the theory behind and the impact of new and advanced automated training models and the need for enhanced learning systems.
Thank you. As you just learned, human and emotional competence is critical for the success of today's organizations. What I will do in my presentation is define and describe human competence, share assumptions about our world and business environment, describe in detail the role of training and education in the development of human competence, share a new tool and system available to increase and ensure learning. Let's look at what human competence is. It is the state of knowing and the capability of doing things and exhibiting certain skills. People must learn or acquire the knowledge and skill sets that fit their lifestyles and jobs. Let's look at the following formula that illustrates human competence. Human competence is equal to educational learning and corporate learning and experiential learning, all tempered or divided by the situation circumstances. This means that we need learning that comes from educational groups and institutions to be targeted to achieve known goals and objectives. In addition, corporate learning comes from training that is provided and added to over time. Experiential learning comes from remembering everything that you have experienced, recalling the experiences, and then acting on them. The last component of human competence is a situation that one is involved in. The situation actually involves the timing, the urgency, the players, the goals, and whatever else is going on at the time. What you will find is that human competence is dependent on lots of learning and is influenced by and customized to the situation. You should now see that human competence will be deficient or will fail if learning is not effective, relevant, and retained. Learning must be targeted to ensure that people have the tools to achieve what they are striving for. Let's look at the value of human competence. It's huge. Here are several of the significant values or the results of human competence. Increased productivity, increased revenues and profits, decreased waste, significant competitive advantage and differentiation, increased morale, and decreased cost. Now, These are not all-inclusive. However, they should show you that there are tremendous value in achieving a high level of human competence. Let's now look at learning through education and training. Since we agreed that learning is the foundation of human competence, we must look thoroughly at its sources with a focus on education, followed by training. The primary differences between the two are when and where the learning takes place and the method of delivery. Educational learning takes place in schools and universities around the world with people of all ages that have different backgrounds and different interests. This type of learning is somewhat general, with a focus on providing broad exposure to a wide range of topics with some specialization. Corporate training, on the other hand, provides employees with information, lessons, skills, policies, procedures, and techniques that are necessary to perform and excel in a given organization. Often, corporate training is required in order to receive a certain license or certificate. These requirements often come from a government or governing body. Because of this, corporate training is typically goal-oriented. Let's take a look at what educational training learning have in common. First, they must be timely. That is, they must be performed and successfully achieved prior to the actual need. For example, firefighters must know what is dangerous and how to put out a fire ahead of time, and not at the moment the need arises. There simply is no better time to learn than before the need. Both educational and corporate training learning must be digestible. Digestibility refers to learning that is provided in small amounts, much like eating. Smaller amounts make it easier to digest and allow the learner to achieve greater value from it. Both types of learning must also be goal-oriented. Educational and corporate learning must also be applicable or usable at a later date. Remember, we are not educating or training people just to know material. They must be users of the information for it to be valuable. Both types of learning must also be quick and flexible. Learning shouldn't take long, and it also should be current. Good learning is customized to the learner and the situation and the goals. There must also be a payback to the relevant parties of learning: schools, students, employees, employers, customers, and stakeholders. Without a payback, the change being sought through learning will not occur, and certainly learning will not be achieved. As a result, with proper learning in the two environments, educational and corporate, human competence is likely to be achieved. Let's look at the learning versus knowledge. Learning tends to be achieved by being exposed to material and being able to remember it shortly. Knowledge, however, takes learning to the next level. Its focus is on the long term and on the ability to use the information and what is learned. Knowledge is cumulative, is added to, and updated for future use. Because of the long-term and cumulative nature of knowledge, it is critical and a critical component of human competence. It, too, is a brick of human competence. What's the role of learning? Ultimately, the role of learning, either through education or training, is to prepare one for the future. In doing this, we are preparing to make and respond to change. Change may be seen in corporations through new procedures, new products, different customers, different locations, and through just creating or adapting to new ways of doing business. On the education front, change is seen in new courses, new learning methods, new programs, different locations, and new and improved delivery mechanisms. In both cases, the sought-after change is dependent on how well people learn and know the material. Without good learning, service and productivity decline. Self-esteem and confidence decline. Morale may be non-existent, and overall revenues and profits suffer. So, you could say that companies and universities that heavily focus on helping their constituents learn are making an investment in the future. Again, our organizations are dependent on what schools put out and must adapt to any failings. This investment in human competence has a high payback when done right. Schools and companies that create or provide a learning situation must increasingly adapt to the learning styles and needs of their constituents. Specifically, they must include audios, visuals, and interactivity in their efforts to ensure that people learn. The more the effort is customized to the learner, the better. Benjamin Bloom, a famous educational psychologist, identified 6 levels of cognitive learning. He found that each of these levels represents a unique stage of learning. These stages are part of a continuum that ranges from knowledge all the way to evaluation. The 6 progressive stages of learning are knowledge, comprehension, application, analysis, synthesis, and evaluation. It is very important to remember, and I will emphasize this, that learning is and should be a progression through each of these stages. In other words, successive stages build on previous stages. This means that knowledge is the foundation for the remaining 5 stages. It also means that, for example, application is dependent on comprehension and knowledge. In summary, if the earlier stages of learning are not effectively addressed, the more advanced stages will suffer. Both learning and education are built much like a pyramid. The foundation is huge and must be strong enough to hold the higher levels of learning. With this analogy, there is more knowledge than comprehension, and more comprehension learning than application learning. In order to fully maximize human competence in organization, these stages must be addressed. Therefore, I would like to briefly describe each stage. Stage 1, knowledge. This is where there is a focus on presenting the basic material where people can arrange, define, label, memorize, name, order, recognize, and reproduce material that is presented to them. This might take the form of new employee orientation materials or the basic formulas in a math class. The knowledge stage is also reflected, for example, by someone who is studying a foreign language and who knows the foreign equivalent of a word they know in their home language. Stage 2, comprehension. We may all think or say that comprehension is important, and it is. It is seen in students or trainees being able to classify, describe, discuss, identify, locate, recognize, or translate material to be learned. For example, students show their comprehension when they can convert an English sentence to Spanish, or when they can identify the capital of Venezuela on a map. Corporate trainees show comprehension by classifying certain parts of a product that go into a finished product, or when they can identify a problem. These are important skills in most companies. Stage 3, application. Learning that shows application is seen in the ability to choose, demonstrate, illustrate, interpret, operate, and write